Hello, everybody. Welcome to Setting Up Quizzes and Exams in Canvas, an overview. I am Christine Roach. I'm an instructional designer at eSale. And joining me today in presenting this is also Enrico. Enrico, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thank you all for participating.
Enrico is another instructional designer here at eSale. And so today I'll be presenting, and Enrico will be watching the chat and supporting the questions as we go. And I encourage you to share your questions through the chat as we go. We have quite a few participants, so if you can put them in the chat, and we do have a good amount of time set aside at the end to answer questions. So as always, remember that we're here to support you. You can open a ticket about eCampus, Canvas, Media Site, any course development questions you have by emailing us at engrlearntech@tamu.edu. And let's get started without any further ado. So our agenda today, we're going to go over creating quizzes, quiz types, the settings and options, adding questions, accommodations, viewing and grading student submissions, the move from weighted columns, importing tests from eCampus, and managing question banks. The quiz tool in Canvas is the equivalent to the tests and surveys tools in eCampus. So it is used in order to create online questions for students to answer for any type of test, exam, or assessment. So there are two ways to create a quiz. First, you can add quizzes from the course navigation menu by clicking on quizzes and then adding a quiz. After creating a quiz within the quizzes menu, you will need to add it to a module and publish it before students will be able to view it. You can also create a quiz from within the module view by clicking on the Add New Content sign at the top of the module. Then select Quiz as your content type, and then click New Quiz and type a name for your quiz. So this will deploy the quiz that you create directly into the module. This is also how you will deploy a quiz, an existing quiz. So if you have a quiz that's not in a module, instead of clicking New Quiz, you'll click the name of the quiz from the list down here in order to add it to a module. When you create a quiz, you have an option to create one of 4 types of quizzes. You can create a graded quiz, a practice quiz, graded surveys, or ungraded surveys. The graded quiz is the most common quiz, and Canvas automatically creates a column in the gradebook for any graded quizzes that you build. And after a student takes a graded quiz, certain question types are automatically graded. You can view the results for graded quizzes in Gradebook on the quiz results page in SpeedGrader. A practice quiz is a quiz that's used as a learning tool to help students to see how well they understand the course material, but students do not receive a grade for practice quizzes. A graded survey allows students to allows instructors to give students points for participating in the survey. And an ungraded survey is just a simple survey that allows you to get opinions and has no points or grade attached to it. So a graded survey, it doesn't allow the survey to be graded for right or wrong answers. It simply assigns points for completion. And surveys can be anonymous as well. Once you have created your quiz, within the Details tab, there are some settings that you can control. So we will get into assignment groups here at the top. Here's your quiz type, and then next is assignment group. We'll get into that a little bit later on when we discuss grading. And then the first option here is to shuffle the answer options, and this is where you would set that option. Shuffling questions is not controlled in this setting area. Instead, you'll need to create a question group to shuffle questions, and we'll go over that in a few slides. Next, you can set a time limit for a certain amount of minutes that students are allowed to work on your quiz. You can decide whether you're going to allow multiple attempts. And if you select this, you'll get some more options that will pop up as well, as far as which attempt grade is kept and how many attempts are allowed. Now here, the next option is let students see their quiz responses. And my recommendation is to uncheck let students see their quiz responses because it allows students to deduce the correct answers on submission. So that may be useful for a practice quiz, but maybe not for a graded quiz. Then of course, you can decide whether students are going to see one question at a time, or they're going to see all the questions in the test at once. And there's also quiz restrictions. And finally, we have the assignment details here. So assignment details is a subsection that allows you to designate who this quiz is assigned to and what times, what availability times they have. We're going to go into this a little bit more in the next slide. This right here sets availabilities for groups or individual students or even sections of students. And once you set one, you can add multiple availabilities in case you have different subgroups of students that will have different availabilities. So let's talk about the time settings for a quiz. So the availability date creates this window where students can enter the quiz and the quiz is available to them. Before and after those availability dates, students may be able to see the quiz title, but they cannot enter or work on the quiz. So the quiz availability window overrides all of the other time settings. So here we have the example of the student who starts late. A student who starts late would have their test automatically submitted when the availability window closes, even if they still were within their time limit. So here's my example of a late starter who has 90 minutes, but who will only be able to work for a portion of that time because they started late. Also, here I have an example of a student with an extra time accommodation, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes as well. So here is a student who's entitled to 135 minutes to work on a test, but because this availability window is set to 120 minutes, their test will also be auto-submitted at 3 p.m. because the test availability overrides all other time settings on that test. So this is where those multiple sets of availabilities can come in handy. If you don't want to make the window larger for everyone, you may just need to make the time availability window larger for students that have extra time, and you can do that quite easily within quiz settings. Now, you may have noticed that there is a due date. Let me go back and show you. There is a due date and there's availability from and until, and some people are confused about why there is a due date. Now that is optional. A due date creates a window of time between the due date and the availability window closing where submissions are still accepted, but they are marked late. Obviously, if you do not put a due date, none of those submissions would be marked late. But if you do want to create that opportunity where students can continue to work, but their submissions are marked as late or penalized, you can do that by creating a due date. Set up the settings, the options for your quiz. You'll click the questions tab to create quiz questions and points. You can create individual quiz questions, questions with a quiz with a question bank, questions with a question group, and questions with a question bank in a question group. And Canvas offers these 12 types of questions when creating a quiz. Multiple choice, multiple answers, true, false, fill in the blank, fill in multiple blanks, multiple drop-down, matching, numerical answer, formula, essay, file upload, and text portion if you want to share information that's not a question. So if you're creating complex questions, you'll want to take some time to explore the possibilities of the rich content editor, which is this portion of, let me go back, this portion of the quiz question interface right here. And this allows you to insert links, documents, images, videos, equations, and format your content in different ways. So this is where if you want to add a PDF file, you can add a link to a PDF file within a question, right, in this area. All right, and so also we have the LaTeX math editor, which is built into the rich content editor. Canvas also includes the option to create equations and expressions with its graphical point and click editor. So within a quiz, students are presented with the questions in the order that they appear in the quiz editor. So you can drag and drop questions to reorder them. However, if you want to randomize questions within a quiz, you must create a question group. And that's the GIF that you should be able to see on your screen right now. Once you create a question group, you can link that question group to an existing question bank, or you can create questions within the group once it is created. And my advice for doing question groups is to go through that process really carefully. It can be a little bit tricky to make sure that you've got all those steps correct. So if you make a question bank and the questions aren't showing up on your test, a question group, I'm sorry, then go ahead and delete that question group and try again, because once you've created that group, I do not see a way for you to link a question bank to it after you have created that group. Just to be careful to hit that create group button before you hit save, or your group won't be saved, and just take it slow and it won't be an issue. So once you have created a group, all the questions within that group are automatically randomized. So here's some things to keep in mind when you're adding the quiz questions. If you're coming from eCampus, you don't have an option for jumbled sentence, quiz bowls, hotspots, and ordering types of questions. On the second point, Canvas cannot do the scientific notation in very small decimals. There are some workarounds for that you can find on the Canvas forum, but there is some limitations on what can be done. Canvas answer options are not labeled A, B, C, and D. And really important that if you have a quiz and you find an error in it and you need to edit it while it is live, those edits don't change the grade or the results for student attempts that were made before you edited. So then at the end of your changes, it will prompt you to regrade, and then you need to manually change that score for those students who already did the test using the regrade function, or you need to go in and allow them another attempt. So that's a little bit different from how it was in Blackboard, so you'll need to keep that in mind. Publishing your quiz. So once you save your quiz, you're going to see some additional options appear that don't appear at the beginning. So when you publish, in order to publish your quiz, you click the Publish button. And publishing a quiz means that students can see the quiz in the course. But if you have an availability window, they can see only the title. They cannot enter it and until that window of time that you've designated is set. So if you do not have an availability window set and you want to keep students from working, you can lock the quiz. That way students will be able to see the test, but they can't go in until you unlock it. Here, in order to see the results for the quiz, for the student submissions, you will click right here where it says number 7 on SpeedGrader, and that will open up an interface where you can see the students' individual responses. And that's also where you can access some of the information about the student attempt. So let's talk about time accommodations. That's one of the most common questions that we get. And so it's a fairly simple setup. That's the good news. But the bad news is that you have to do it manually and individually for each student, for each quiz. As far as I know, if any of you know a way to set a policy where this applies for a certain student for every quiz, please let me know, because that is a big question that we're coming across. So in order to do this, you go on the published quiz page, on published quiz detail page, you click the title of the quiz to get into this page. And then on the sidebar, you'll see moderate this quiz. When you click moderate this quiz, you will see an interface with a list of student names. And here, I don't have the student names, but this is what that is. And then on the far left-hand corner, there's a little pencil. You click on the pencil, And this window right here, the student extensions window, will open that will allow you to set extra time for each attempt. And that is where you can add your time and a half, or whatever the student is entitled to. Again, you can use this in combination with a unique availability that has assignment for certain students. So you can customize it further. This is mostly relevant in this circumstance where you put a limited amount of time on a test. Okay, so once you've created your quiz, published it, students are making submissions, you want to know how you can view student submissions. So you can access student submissions either from the sidebar within that quiz page itself. So you go to quizzes, click on the title of the quiz, and then click on SpeedGrader in the sidebar right here. Also note that you can download submissions by right in the sidebar. This is where you would go if you want to download a package of all the student submissions. And you can do this for student submissions that are documents, but you can also do this for text submissions and other types of submissions. Right. And another way you can get to SpeedGrader is by going to the course navigation menu and clicking on grades. And that will take you to the grade book that has all the columns of all the grades. And then in each column for the grade, these columns that are created automatically when you create that graded assignment or quiz, in this stoplight options menu, you drop that down and you can click on SpeedGrader, and that is where you can grade those submissions. That's where you can view those submissions. So a couple of different ways to get there. Now, most question types will be self-grading, and here is what you will see for these self-grading questions. When you open SpeedGrader, this is what the interface looks like. So previously, I have had questions, specifically whether you can grade by question with all the responses for one question on one page. And the answer is no, you can't do that on Canvas. Big sad. So you do have to click through this one by one to view that, or click through the student's name one by one to grade by question right now. And here's what it looks like if the student submission is a document. And this is very similar to the inline grading in Blackboard, where you can make annotations, text annotations on the document itself if you desire. And then remember, you do have the option to download a package with all of your student submissions and then re-upload them into the SpeedGrader. Okay, so in the chat area, Andrew asked, say you have a 2-part exam or quiz. Is there a way to have part 2 open once they've submitted part 1?
What I would say is that you can actually create 2 exams and create 2 like mini modules in Canvas so that you can set the open settings for the second module once they completed the first one. Does it make sense? And we can help you with this if you need more info. I think it's very doable to do that. So 2 mini modules, and inside each module, like let's say exam part 1, exam part 2, then you can set the release options for the second module, like they have to respond to the first quiz, or they have to get a certain grade on the first quiz, or something along those lines. You can set those conditions.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we all were accustomed to using weighted columns in eCampus to calculate grade values. And in Canvas, there are no weighted columns. So instead, you need to set up any grading calculations either by setting up a point scheme or by using assignment groups. So assignment groups allows you to set up, organize your assignments into categories with percentage weights that match your syllabus specifications. And so you can set up these categories within the Assignments tab on the course navigation menu. And when you're in the Assignments tab, you'll see in the far right-hand corner 3 options, and you can add a group. And then once you've added your groups, you can click on the stoplight options menu and click assignment groups weight, and that will open the interface where you can set the percentage weight for each group. Then within the assignment page, you'll be able to see all the graded activities by the groups, and you can easily add assignments there, or you can drag and drop assignments from one group to another. So I know a lot of people, myself included, are used to waiting to the end of the semester and then using weighted columns in a mishmash of columns that are within eCampus. And so when you're moving over from eCampus, it's really important to take some time to plan this out so you don't end up with difficulties at the end of the semester, because it can be tricky to change things after students have already completed these activities, especially if you have point values, because if you change the point value of an assignment, it doesn't automatically update that attempt for students. And so you would need to go back and change their grades manually, is my understanding. So you definitely want to sort this out beforehand, especially your first time around. And then afterwards, as you get more familiar, it'll be a little bit easier. I also want to invite Jerry to, if he has any insight on this, because he was the one who really brought this to my attention. So.
What was the question, Christine? There?
Oh, do you have any advice that you would give in transitioning from weighted columns into assignment groups for Canvas?
Well, the advice would be to use always like a 100% scale on each assignment, and then use the assignment value to trigger weights. Like, for example, if you have different type of quizzes or different type of homeworks, some instructors have some homework questions or homeworks that are more difficult than others, and they like to ponder them differently. So you can create different assignment categories, like homeworks level 1, homeworks level 2, or things along that nature, so that you can have that flexibility that you used to have before on eCampus, making more complex operations. In here, you can level the use of assignment groups to make as many assignment groups as needed, and that will allow you to have a more granular way of grading.
Well, thank you very much for that insight. Definitely, it's a little bit of a change of schema than the Blackboard gradebook. So, there's a little bit of a learning curve on that. Okay, so we've talked about creating tests from scratch in Canvas, but some of you may have already developed tests, quizzes, question pools in eCampus that you want to transfer over into your course. Or you may want to bring in a package of test questions that comes from the publisher. And so you can do this, and it's a relatively easy process. So first, you'll want to create an export zip file from eCampus. So this is good when you want to take in the entire contents of a course, or if you want to selectively just bring in some portions of a course, like just the test banks and quizzes. So the process, there's a little GIF that's running right now. The process is you go into Packages and Utilities on the Course Management menu, and then you select Package, Export Archive Course, and then you click on Export Package. And then you can choose whether you want to export your entire course or you want to export only your test surveys and pools. And so you have an option of exporting all of your content or selectively exporting, and you also will have the option to import all of the content from a package or selectively import in Canvas, and that can be up to you whether you want to have which way you want to do it. But a smaller package, as what I'm demonstrating here, may have a lower processing time. So once your export has processed and you've downloaded that zip file, don't open the zip file because that can sometimes cause the zip file to corrupt. You just want to carry that over to Canvas, and let's look and see how the import process looks in Canvas. So within Canvas, the import process is also fairly simple. So on the sidebar menu, you can select import, and then you can choose content type. And in content type, select Blackboard 6789 export zip file. And you'll see there that there's actually several content types that you can import. But the Blackboard export file is what you're actually bringing in. So you have the option again to import the whole package, or you can import selectively specific content from within that package. So the package first uploads and then it processes. Is that two-step process right there. And it can take a while, so you can work on other things while that's happening and then refresh your course in 5 or 10 minutes and see if the process is complete. Yeah, so when you bring in new content, the new content is added. It doesn't replace anything. If you want to erase everything from your course, in the sidebar menu for settings, there is an option that allows you to reset the course, and that will delete everything from your course. But as you import, you can just stack up multiple imports. So in this course, you can see that I have 3 different imports that in this GIF. The first import was a Canvas cartridge import that I did, and then I did a file import. And now I'm doing this test import. So you can stack up as many import as you want. And so let me show you where that import menu is, because I think that this GIF actually skips that step. So hang on just a second. Okay, so when you look on the sidebar menu on the far right-hand side, the first option is to import your existing content. And once you click there, it takes you to that interface that we just saw where you can select the content. And these are all the different types of files that you can import. Canvas course export package, a zip file full of files, various different LMS imports, QTI files if you get tests from a publisher. So some things to keep in mind about importing tests. If you have test questions where they have individual feedback for each answer option, my understanding is that the Blackboard export files don't contain feedback, or I'm not sure. Yes, I believe they don't contain the feedback, or the feedback's not in a format that can import. So if that's going to be, if that's something that you've invested a lot of time in developing, that customized feedback, then you'll need to look into exporting using Common Cartridge. And that's something that I haven't got into much, but that is a solution for that issue. And of course, we've mentioned this. Also, if you have rubrics that are attached, the rubrics, the setup, the formatting in Canvas is upside down. And so they won't import correctly. You'll need to take the time to just manually create those. And a good solution is just open up the rubric from Blackboard and open up a rubric in Canvas side by side and just copy paste those things into the appropriate space. And that is not a solution I like, but that is the workaround that we have right now. All right, so moving forward to question banks. This will be pretty much the last topic we'll go into. So question banks are what was called question pools. And so the most important thing that you probably need to know about question banks is how to find them, because I know that when I started working with Canvas, this stumped me over and over again. So go into quizzes. There's no other way to find it except going into quizzes and then going into this stoplight options menu and then going into manage question banks. And it seems counterintuitive because there's so many other ways to get to things, but this one is just one way. That's where you find it. So if you add a quiz question and it's not added into a quiz, a bank, then it's stored in a bank that's called unfiled. So that's important to know. So once you've created a quiz bank, if you want to use it in exam or quiz, you click at the bottom of the quiz detail page, you click Find Questions. And that's where you're going to be able to open up those question banks. And that's the second place where I tended to get lost because I couldn't, this doesn't say question banks, or it doesn't give you any tips to know that that's where you get to the question banks. And so once you click Find Questions, it will open up an interface that has all of your question banks listed on the left. And then once you click on the question bank, all the questions within the bank will open up on the right-hand side, and you can select some or all of those to add in to your quiz. When you have question banks, a really important question is how to reuse those across semesters or in different courses. And so one way is to bookmark a bank. And so if you bookmark a bank, that bank will be able to be viewable in other courses that belong to you. So you can, once you have a bookmark bank, you can view bookmark banks and you'll be able to see all of the banks that you have for all of the courses over here on this option. So you can also share or transfer question banks by exporting it, either exporting the course or just exporting the QTI zip file individually and then importing it into your target course. Okay, so one thing that I want to make sure that you know about question banks is that question banks don't automatically update the quizzes. So when you add a quiz question into a quiz, it's a copy of the quiz. It's not directly linked to that bank. So if you need to update that question, you have to update it in both places. Or if you update it within the bank, you need to then remove it and then re-add it in order for it to update within that quiz. We're getting towards the end of our time. And so I'll just mention that there's right now currently, hang on just a second. So there are 5 proctoring options available, and the information for those proctoring options that we have available at TAMU currently is located on keepteaching.tamu.edu and /# proctoring glance. So that's on the Keep Teaching page, and then that gives you a lot of information on different proctoring. You might also keep an eye out for some upcoming some upcoming webinars on that. So that is, I'm not going to get into that in a lot of depth just now. So this is the Keep Teaching page. Also, I highly recommend checking out the instructor guide or searching in the community for your more specialized questions on quizzes. That's where I've been doing a lot of my learning around this. So I highly recommend doing that, especially with your specialized questions. And the instructor guide is very in detail, and the community itself as well is very supportive and a lot of active people there. All right, and thank y'all so much for attending. Look for a follow-up email. I'll send you the slide deck for your reference, and also a survey that you can complete to give us feedback on how this workshop was for you. And just a reminder, if you have any other questions, things that come to your mind, please feel free to send us an email. We'll look at those tickets. We'll get back to you, follow up with you. And I'll stick around for a few minutes. So if you have more questions, I'll be on here. We can go back and forth and discuss things for a little while.